Hey there, everybody. So, Opal is over here inspecting the carpet for crumbs and trying to ensure that I get to sleep at a reasonable hour. But I'm an adult, and I get to decide what that reasonable hour is. So, first of all, huge outpouring of support from Imgur from today being, well, a rather difficult day. And hilarious lesson today is there is a check engine light. There is also a fix engine now light. My car decided that the transmission needed to fall out on my drive to work. Luckily, we got in okay, but I actually got an alert on my HUD for transmission fault, service engine now, in nice big bright red letters. I think my car might be dead. So we're figuring out if it's salvageable or if I'm going to have to get a new car. So that's going to be interesting. So, also, as promised, we have spirited beverage, as noted in a post on Imgur. And yes, I call it Imgur because it's the Imgiraffe. We also have some lovely birch beer from Roy Rogers. And of course, Hail Hydrate. So. Oh, right. Also, exciting news. I have 8 subscribers. That's really cool. So apparently I'm doing something right. People are just... I guess that means people are grateful, which is really nice. So, anyway, I hope you weren't expecting more ado, because without further ado, chewing on cardboard. It goes right through. She's okay. I love this dog, but she thinks with her mouth. Anyway, no more adoing. Chapter 5, which is far too full of washing. The only thing to do, Sophie decided, was to show Howl that she was an excellent cleaning lady, a real treasure. She tied an old rag round her wispy white hair, rolled up the sleeves of her skinny old arms, and wrapped up an old tablecloth from the broom cupboard round her as an apron. It was rather a relief to think that there were only 4 rooms to clean instead of a whole castle. She grabbed up a bucket and a besom and got to work. "What are you doing?" cried Michael and Calcifer in a horrified chorus. "Cleaning up," Sophie said firmly. "This place is a disgrace." Calcifer said, "It doesn't need it." And Michael muttered, "Howl will kick you out." But Sophie ignored them both. Dust flew in clouds. In the midst of it, there came another set of thumps at the door. Calcifer blazed up, calling, "Port Haven door!" and gave a great, sizzling sneeze, which shot purple sparks through the dust clouds. Michael left the workbench and went to the door. Oh, that's good beverage. Sophie peered out through the dust that she was raising and saw that this time Michael turned the square knob over the door so that this blue side of the knob so that the side with a blue blob of paint on it was downward. Then he opened the door on the street you saw out of the window. A small girl stood there. "Please, Mr. Fisher," she said, "I've come for that spell from me mum." Safety spell for your dad's boat, wasn't it?" Michael said. "Won't be a moment." He went back to the bench and measured powder from a jar from the shelves into a square of paper. While he was doing it, the little girl peered in at Sophie curiously as Sophie peered out at her. Michael twisted the paper round the powder and came back saying, "Tell her to sprinkle it right along the boat. It'll last out and back, and even if there's a storm." The girl took the paper and passed over a coin. "Has the sorcerer got a witch working for him, too?" she asked. "No," said Michael. "Meaning me?" Sophie called.
"Oh, yes, my child. I'm the best and cleanest witch in all of hunngryy."
Michael shut the door, looking exasperated. That will be all around Porthaven now. Howl may not like that. He turned the knob green blob down again. Sophie cackled to herself a little, quite unrepentant. Probably she had let the besom she was using put ideas into her head, but it might persuade Howl to let her stay if everyone thought that she was working for him. It was odd. As a girl, Sophie would have shriveled with embarrassment the way that she was behaving. As an old woman, she did not mind what she did or said. She found that was a great relief. She went nosily over as Michael lifted up a stone in the hearth and hid the little girl's coin under it.
"What are you doing?"
"Well, Calcifer and I try to keep a store of money," Michael said rather guiltily. "Howl spends every penny we've got if we don't."
"Feckless spendthrift," Calcifer crackled. "He'll spend the king's money faster than I can burn a log. No sense."
Sophie sprinkled water from the sink to lay the dust, which made Calcifer shrink back against the chimney. Then she swept the floor all over again. She swept her way towards the door in order to have a look at the square knob above it. The fourth side, which she had not used yet, had a blob of black paint on it. Which she had not seen used yet, had a blob of black paint on it. Wondering where that led to, Sophie began briskly sweeping the cobwebs off the beams. Michael moaned and Calcifer sneezed again. Howl came out of the bathroom just then in a waft of steamy perfume. He looked marvelously spruce. Even the silver inlets and embroidery on his suit seemed to have become brighter. He took one look and backed into the bathroom again, with a blue and silver sleeve protecting his head. "Stop it, woman! Leave those poor spiders alone!"
"These cobwebs are a disgrace," Sophie declared, fetching them down in bundles.
"Then get them down and leave the spiders," said Howl. Probably he had a wicked affinity with spiders, Sophie thought.
"They'll only make more webs," she said.
"And kill flies, which is very useful."
"Which is true," said Howl.
"Keep that broom still while I cross my own room, please." Sophie leaned on the broom and watched Howl cross the room and pick up his guitar. As he put his hand on the door latch, she said, "If the red blob leads to Kingsbury and the blue knob goes to Porthaven, where does the black blob take you?" "What a nosy old woman you are," said Howl. "That leads to my private bolt hole, and you are not being told where that is." He opened the door onto the wide, moving moorland and the hills. "When will you be back, Howl?" Michael asked, a little despairingly. Howl pretended not to hear. He said to Sophie, "You're not to kill a single spider while I'm away." And the door slammed behind him. Michael looked meaningly at Calcifer and sighed. Calcifer crackled with malicious laughter. Since nobody explained where Howl had gone to, Sophie concluded that he was off to hunt young girls again, and got down to work with more righteous vigor than ever. She did not dare harm any spiders after what Howl had said, so she banged at the beams with the broom, screaming, "Out, spiders, out of my way!" Spiders scrambled for their lives every which way, and webs fell in swaths. Then, of course, she had to sweep the floor yet again. After that, she got down on her knees and scrubbed it. "I wish you'd stop," Michael said, sitting on the stairs out of the way. Calcifer, cowering at the back of the grate, muttered, "I wish I'd never made that bargain with you now." Sophie scrubbed on vigorously.
"You'll be much happier when it's all nice and clean," she said.
"But I'm miserable now," Michael protested. Howl did not come back again until late that night, but by that time Sophie had swept and scrubbed herself into a state where she could hardly move. She was sitting hunched up in the chair, aching all over. Michael took hold of Howl by a trailing sleeve and towed him over to the bathroom, where Sophie could hear him pouring out complaints in a passionate mutter. Phrases like "terrible old biddy" and "won't listen to a word" were quite easy to hear, even though Calcifer was roaring, "Howl, stop her! She's killing us both!" But all Howl said when Michael let go of him was, "Did you kill any spiders?"
"Of course not,"
Sophie snapped. Her aches made her irritable.
They look at me and they run for their lives. What are they? All the girls whose hearts you ate?
Howl laughed. No, just simple spiders, he said, and went dreamily away upstairs. Opal, would you like to sit on the balcony for a bit? Okay, I will let you sit on the balcony for a bit. She is being so cute right now. Okay. I can't show you off to the internet. Hello. Hello, I love you. You're a good girl. She's very cute. And usually quite well behaved, too. All right. Let me get the door for you. You go outside? Or are you telling me it's bedtime? Okay, well, I will keep reading, and you get a kissy. I love you, sweetheart. You're a good girl. You're a good girl. I love you. Okay, so I will sit like this, but I will free up my left hand so that I can show you proper love and attention. Sorry. Michael sighed. He went into the broom cupboard and hunted until he found an old folding bed, a straw mattress with some rugs, which he put into the arched space under the stairs. You'd better sleep here tonight, he told Sophie. Does that mean Howl is going to let me stay? Sophie asked. I don't know, Michael said irritably. Howl never commits himself to anything. I was here 6 months before he even seemed to notice that I was living here and made me his apprentice. I just thought a bed would be better than the chair. Well then, thank you very much, Sophie said gratefully. The bed was indeed more comfortable than a chair, and when Calcifer complained that he was hungry in the night, it was an easy matter for Sophie to creak her way out and give him another log. In the days that followed, Sophie cleaned her way remorselessly through the castle. She really enjoyed herself, telling herself she was looking for clues. She washed the window, cleaned out the oozing sink, and she made Michael clear everything off the workbench and the shelves so that she could scrub them. She had everything out of the cupboards and down from the beams and cleaned those too. The human skull, she fancied, began to look as long-suffering as Michael. It had been moved so often. Then she tacked an old sheet to the beams nearest the fireplace and forced Calcifer to bend his head down while she swept the chimney. Calcifer hated that. He crackled with mean laughter when Sophie discovered that all the soot had gotten all over the room and she had to clean it all again. That was Sophie's trouble. She was remorseless, but she lacked method. But there was this method to her remorselessness. Blech. She calculated that she could not clean this thoroughly without sooner or later coming across Howl's hidden hoard of girls' souls or chewed hearts or else something that explained Calcifer's contract. Up the chimney guarded by Calcifer had struck her as a good hiding place, but there was nothing there but quantities of soot, which Sophie stored in bags in the yard. The yard was high on her list of hiding places. Yes, Brown Eyes? She's just giving me this most piteous look. Stop reading and pay attention to me. Every time Howl came in, Michael and Calcifer complained loudly about Sophie, but Howl did not seem to attend, nor did he seem to notice the cleanliness, and nor did he notice that the food closet became very well stocked, with cakes and jam and the occasional lettuce. For, as Michael had prophesied, word had gone round in Porthaven. People came to the door to look at Sophie. They called her Mrs. Witch in Porthaven and Madam Sorceress in Kingsbury. Word had gone round the capital, too. Though the people who came to the Kingsbury door were better dressed than those in Porthaven, no one in either place liked to call on someone so powerful without an excuse. So Sophie was always having to pause in the middle of her work to nod and smile and take a gift, or to get Michael to put up a quick spell for someone. Some of the gifts were nice things. Pictures, strings of shells, and useful aprons. Sophie used the aprons daily and hung the shells and pictures round her cubbyhole under the stairs, which soon began to look very homelike indeed. Sophie knew that she would miss this when Howl turned her out. She became more and more afraid that he would. She knew that he could not go on ignoring her forever. So she cleaned the bathroom next. That took her days because Howl spent so long in it every day before he went out. As soon as he went, leaving it full of steam and scented spells, Sophie moved in.
Now we'll see about that contract, she
Muttered at the bath. But her main target was, of course, the shelf of packets, jars, and tubes. She took every one of them down on the pretext of scrubbing the shelf, and spent most of a day carefully going through them to see if the ones labeled skin, eyes, and hair were in fact pieces of girl. As far as she could tell, they were all just creams and powders and paint. If they had once been girls, then Sophie thought Howl had used the tube for decay on them and rotted them down in the wash basin too thoroughly to recall. But she hoped that they were only cosmetics in the packets. She put things back on the shelf and scrubbed, and that night, as she sat, aching in the chair, Calcifer grumbled that he had drained one hot spring dry for her. "Where are the hot springs?" Sophie asked. She was curious about everything these days.
"Under the Port Haven marshes, mostly," Calcifer said. "But if you go on like this, I'll have to fetch hot water from the waste. When are you going to stop cleaning and find out how to break my contract?" "In good time," said Sophie. "How can I get the terms out of Howl if he's never in? Is he always away this much?"
Beverage.
"Only when there's a lady," Calcifer said.
When the bathroom was clean and gleaming, Sophie scrubbed the stairs and the landing upstairs. Then she moved on into Michael's small front room. Michael, who by this time seemed to be accepting Sophie gloomily as some sort of natural disaster, gave a yell of dismay and pounded upstairs to rescue his most treasured possessions. They were in an old box under his worm-eaten little bed. As he hurried the box protectively away, Sophie glimpsed a blue ribbon and a spun sugar rose in it, on top of what seemed to be letters.
"So, Michael has a sweetheart," she said to herself,
as she flung the window open. It opened into the street in Port Haven, too, and heaved his bedding across the sill to the air. Considering how nosy she'd lately become, Sophie was rather surprised at herself for not asking Michael who this girl was and how he kept her safe from Howl. She swept away such quantities of dust and rubbish from Michael's room that she nearly swamped Calcifer trying to burn it all.
"You'll be the death of me! You're as heartless as Howl!"
Calcifer choked. Only his green hair and a blue piece of his long forehead showed. Michael put his precious box in the drawer of the workbench and locked the drawer. "I wish Howl would listen to us," he said. "Why is this girl taking him so long?" The next day, Sophie tried to start on the backyard, but it was raining in Port Haven that day, driving against the window and pattering in the chimney, making Calcifer hiss with annoyance. The yard was part of the Port Haven house, too, so it was pouring out there when Sophie opened the door. She put her apron over her head and rummaged a little, and before she got too wet, she found a bucket of whitewash and a large paintbrush. She took these indoors and set to work on the walls. You go lay down, little girl. I love you, sweetheart. You go ahead and lay down. It'll be a little bit longer. It'll be a little bit longer yet. I love you. I don't want pets. I want bed. Well, you can go to bed. I turned on the fan for you already. So demanding. Well, you have to wait because I'm the adult. She found an old stepladder in the broom cupboard, and she whitewashed the ceiling between the beams, too. It rained for the next 2 days in Port Haven, though, when Howl opened the door with the knob a green blob down and stepped out onto the hill, the weather there was sunny, with big cloud shadows racing over the heather faster than the castle could move. Sophie whitewashed her cubbyhole, the stairs, the landing, and Michael's room.
What's happened in here? Howl asked when he came in on the third day. It seems much lighter.
Sophie, Michael said in a voice of doom. I should have guessed, Howl said as he disappeared into the bathroom.
He noticed, Michael whispered to Calcifer. The girl must be giving in at last.
It was still drizzling in Port Haven the next day. Sophie tied on her headcloth, rolled up her sleeves, and girded up her apron. She collected her besom, her bucket, her soap, and, as soon as Howl was out the door, she set off like an elderly, avenging angel to clean Howl's bedroom. She'd left that until last for fear that what she would find. She'd not even dared peep into it. And that was silly, she thought as she hobbled up the stairs. By now it was clear that Calcifer did all the strong magic in the castle, and Michael did all the hack work, while Howl gadded off catching girls and exploiting the other two just as Fanny had exploited her. Sophie had never found Howl particularly frightening. Now she felt nothing but contempt. She arrived on the landing and found Howl standing in the doorway of his bedroom. He was leaning lazily on one hand, completely blocking her way. "Oh, no, you don't," he said, quite pleasantly. "I want it dirty. Thank you." Sophie gaped at him.
Where did you come from? I saw you go out.
"I meant you to," said Howl. "You'd done your worst with Calcifer and poor Michael. It stood to reason that you would descend on me today. And, whatever Calcifer told you, I am a wizard, you know. Didn't you think I could do magic?" This undermined all of Sophie's assumptions. She would have died rather than admit it.
Everyone knows you're a wizard, young man, she said severely, but that doesn't alter the fact that your castle is the dirtiest place I've ever been in.
She looked into the room past Howl's dangling blue and silver sleeve. The carpet on the floor was littered like a bird's nest. She glimpsed peeling walls and a shelf full of books, some of them very queer-looking. There was no sign of a pile of gnawed hearts, but those were probably behind or under the huge four-poster bed. Its hangings were gray-white with dust, and they prevented her from seeing what the window looked out onto. Howl swung his sleeve over in front of her face. Don't be nosy."
"I'm not being nosy," Sophie protested. "That room."
"Yes, you are nosy," said Howl. "You're dreadfully nosy, horribly bossy, appallingly clean old woman. Control yourself. You're victimizing us all."
"But it's a pigsty," said Sophie. "I can't help what I am."
"Yes, you can," said Howl. "And I like my room the way it is. You must admit, I have the right to live in a pigsty if I want. Now, go downstairs and think of something else to do. Please, I hate quarreling with people." There was nothing Sophie could do but hobble away with her bucket clanking by her side. She was a little shaken and very surprised that Howl had not thrown her out of the castle on the spot. But, since he had not, she thought of the next thing that needed doing at once. She opened the door beside the stairs, found the drizzle had almost stopped, and sallied out into the yard, where she began vigorously sorting through piles of dripping rubbish. There was a metallic clash, and Howl appeared again, stumbling slightly in the middle of the large sheet of rusty iron Sophie had been going to move next.
"Not here either! You are a terror, aren't you? Leave this yard alone!"
"I know just where everything is in it, and I won't be able to find the things I need for my transport spells if you tidy them up." So, there was probably a bundle of souls or a box of chewed hearts somewhere out there, Sophie thought. She felt really thwarted. "Tidying up is what I'm here for," she shouted at Howl. "Well then, you must think of a new meaning for your life," Howl said. "Pepperoni." For a moment it seemed as if he was going to lose his temper too. His strange, pale eyes all but glared at Sophie. But he controlled himself. and said, "Now, trot along indoors, you overactive old thing, and find something else to play with before I get angry. I hate getting angry." Sophie folded up her skinny arms. She did not like being glared at by eyes like glass marbles. "Of course you hate being angry," she retorted. "You don't like anything unpleasant, do you? You're a slitherer outer, that's what you are. You slither away from anything you don't like." Howl gave a forced sort of smile. "Well now," he said, "now we both know each other's faults. Now, go back into the house. Go on back." He advanced on Sophie, waving her towards the door. The sleeve of his waving arm caught the edge of a rusty metal, jerked and tore. "Oh, damnation!" said Howl, holding up the trailing blue and silver ends. "Look at what you made me do!" "I can mend it," Sophie said. Howl gave her another glassy look. "There you go again," he said. How you must love servitude." He took his torn sleeve gently between his fingers of his right hand and pulled it through them. As the blue and silver fabric left his fingers, there was no tear in it at all. "There. Understand?" Sophie hobbled back indoors, rather chastened. Wizards clearly had no need to work in the ordinary way. Howl had shown her that he really was a wizard to be reckoned with. "Why didn't he turn me out?" she half said to herself, and half to Michael. "Beats me, but I think he goes by Calcifer. Most people who come in here either don't notice Calcifer, or they're scared stiff of him." Chapter 6, in which Howl expresses his feelings with green slime. Howl did not go out that day, nor the next few days. Sophie sat quietly in the chair by the hearth, keeping out of his way and thinking. She saw that, much as Howl deserved it, she had been taking out her feelings on the castle when she really was angry with the Witch of the Waste, and she was a little upset at the thought that she was here on false pretenses. Howl might think Calcifer liked her, but Sophie knew Calcifer had simply seized on the chance to make a bargain with her, and Sophie rather thought that she had let Calcifer down. Whew! It's been a while since I had beverage. This state of mind did not last. Sophie discovered a pile of Michael's clothes that needed mending. So she fetched out thimble, scissors, and thread from her sewing pocket and set to work. By that evening, she was cheerful enough to join in Calcifer's silly little song about saucepans. "Happy in your work?" Howl said sarcastically. "I need more to do," Sophie said. "Well, my old suit needs mending if you have to feel busy," Howl said. This seemed to mean that Howl was no longer annoyed, and Sophie was relieved. She'd been almost frightened that morning. It was clear Howl had not yet caught the girl he was after. Sophie listened to Michael asking rather obvious questions about it, and Howl slithering neatly out of answering any of them. "He is a slitherer outer," Sophie murmured to a pair of Michael's socks. "Can't even face his own wickedness." She watched Howl being restlessly busy in order to hide his discontent. That was something Sophie understood rather well. At the bench, Howl worked a good deal harder and faster than Michael, putting spells together in an expert but slapdash way. From the look on Michael's face, most of the spells were both unusual and hard to do, but Howl would leave a spell midway and dash up to his bedroom to look after something hidden, and, no doubt, sinister, going on up there, and then shortly race out into the yard to tinker with a large spell out there. Sophie opened the door a crack and was rather amazed to see the elegant wizard kneeling in the mud with his long sleeves tied together behind his neck to keep them out of the way while he carefully heaved a tangle of greasy metal into a special framework of some kind. That spell was for the king. Another overdressed and scented messenger arrived with a letter and a long speech, in which he wondered if Howl could possibly spare time, no doubt valuable employed in other ways, to bend his powerful and ingenious mind to a small problem experienced by his royal majesty, to wit, how an army might get his heavy wagons through marsh and rough ground. Howl was wonderfully polite and long-winded in reply. He said no, but the messenger spoke for a further half hour, at the end of which he and Howl bowed to one another, and Howl agreed to do the spell. "This is a bit ominous," Howl said to Michael when the messenger had gone. "What did Suleiman have to get himself lost in the waste for? The king seems to think I'll do it instead." "Well, he wasn't as inventive as you, by all accounts," Michael said. "Really, I'm too patient and polite," Howl said gloomily. "I should have overcharged him even more." Howl was equally patient and polite with customers from Porthaven, but, as Michael anxiously pointed out, the trouble was that Howl did not charge these people enough. This was after Howl had listened for an hour to the reasons why a seaman's wife could not pay him a penny yet, and then promised a sea captain a wind spell for almost nothing. Howl eluded Michael's arguments by giving him a magic lesson. "No, stop, bad, no arguing. Have a stick. Go get the ball." Sophie sewed buttons on Michael's shirts and listened to Howl going through a spell with Michael. "I know I'm slapdash," he was saying, "but there's no need for you to copy me. Always read it right through, carefully first. The shape of it should tell you a lot, whether it's self-fulfilling or self-discovering, or simple incantation, or mixed action and speech. When you've decided that, go through again and decide which bits mean what they say, and which bits are put in as a puzzle. You'll find every spell of power has at least one deliberate mistake or mystery in it to prevent accidents. You have to spot those. Now, take this spell." Listening to Michael's halting replies to Howl's questions, and watching Howl scribble remarks on the paper with a strange, everlasting quill pen, Sophie realized that she could learn a lot too. It dawned on her that if Martha could discover the spell to swap herself and Letty about at Mrs. Fairfax's, then she ought to be able to do the same here. With a bit of luck, there might be no need to rely on Calcifer. When Howl was satisfied that Michael had forgotten all about how much or how little he charged people in Porthaven, he took him into the yard to help with the king's spell. Sophie creaked to her feet and hobbled over to the bench. The spell was clear enough, but Howl's scrawled remarks defeated her. "I've never seen such writing," she grumbled to the human skull. "Does he use a pen or a poker?" She sorted eagerly through every scrap of paper on the bench and examined the powders and liquids in the crooked jars. "Yes, let's admit it," she told the skull. "I snoop, and I have my proper reward. I can find out how to cure foul pest and abate whooping cough, raise a wind, and remove hairs from the face. If Martha had found this lot, she'd still be at Mrs. Fairfax's." I was this close to saying break-win. I am the absolute picture of maturity. That's the word I was looking for. Maturity. Howl, it seemed to Sophie, went and examined all the things that she'd moved when he came in from the yard, but that seemed to be only restlessness. He seemed not to know what to do with himself after that. Sophie heard him roving up and down during the night. He was only an hour in the bathroom the next morning. He seemed not to be able to contain himself while Michael put on his best plum velvet suit, ready to go to the palace in Kingsbury, and the two of them wrapped up the bulky spell in golden paper. The spell must have been surprisingly light for its size. Michael could carry it on its own easily, with both his arms wrapped round it. Howl turned the knob over to the door red down for him, and sent him out into the street among the painted houses. "They're expecting it," Howl said. "You should only have to wait most of the morning. Tell them a child could work it. Show them, and when you come back, I'll have a spell of power for you to get work on. So long." He shut the door and roved round the room again. "My feet itch," he said suddenly. "I'm going for a walk in the hills. Tell Michael that the spell I promised him is on the bench, and here's for you to keep busy with." Sophie found a grey and scarlet suit, as fancy as the blue and silver one, dropped into her lap from nowhere. Howl, meanwhile, picked up his guitar from its corner, turned the doorknob green down, and stepped out among the scudding heather above market chipping.
His feet itch,
Grumbled Calcifer. There was a fog down in Port Haven. Calcifer was low among his logs, moving uneasily this way and that to avoid the drips in the chimney.
How does he think I feel stuck in a damp grate like this?
Well, then, you'll have to give me a hint at least about how to break your contract, Sophie said, shaking out the gray and scarlet suit.
Goodness, you're a fine suit, even if you are a bit warm. Built to pull in the girls, aren't you?
I have given you a hint, Calcifer fizzed. Twice, in fact. Then you'll have to give it to me again. I didn't catch it, Sophie said, as she laid the suit down and hobbled to the door. Again, I really like the Chekhov's line. It's wonderful, and once you finished the book, you notice it. Every time. And it feels very clever every time. If I give you a hint and tell you it's a hint, it will be information, and I'm not allowed to give that. Where are you going? To do something I didn't dare do until they were both out, Sophie said. She twisted the square knob over the door until the black knob pointed downward. Then she opened the door, and there was nothing outside. It was neither black nor gray nor white. It was not thick nor transparent. It did not move. It had no smell nor feel. And when Sophie put a very cautious finger out into it, it was neither hot nor cold. It felt of nothing. It seemed utterly and completely nothing.
What is this? She asked Calcifer.
Calcifer was as interested as Sophie. His blue face was leaning out of the grate to see the door. He'd forgotten the fog.
I don't know, he whispered. I only maintain, and all I know is that it's on the side of the castle that no one can walk around. It feels really quite far away.
It feels beyond the moon, said Sophie. She shut the door and turned the knob green downwards. She hesitated a minute, and then started to hobble towards the stairs.
He's locked it, said Calcifer. He told me to tell you if you tried to snoop again.
Snoop. Oh, said Sophie.
What has he got up there?
I've no idea, said Calcifer. I don't know anything about upstairs. If only you knew how frustrating it is. I can't even really see around outside the castle, only enough to see what direction I'm going in. Sophie, feeling equally frustrated, sat down and began mending the gray and scarlet suit. Michael came in quite soon after that. The king saw me at once, he said. He looked around the room. His eyes went to the empty corner where the guitar usually stood. Oh no, not the lady friend again. I thought she'd fallen in love with him, and it was all over days ago. What's keeping her? Calcifer fizzed wickedly. You got the signs wrong. Heartless Howl's finding his lady rather tough. He decided to leave her alone a few days to see if that would help. That's all. Oh, bother, said Michael. That's bound to mean trouble, and here I was hoping that Howl was almost sensible again. Sophie banged the suit down on her knees. Really, she said, how can you both talk like that about such utter wickedness? At least I suppose I can't blame Calcifer because he's an evil demon, but you, Michael. I don't think I'm evil, Calcifer protested. But I'm not calm about it, if that's what you think, Michael said. If you knew the trouble we've had because Howl will keep falling in love like this. We've had lawsuits and suitors with swords and mothers with rolling pins, fathers and uncles with cudgels and aunts. Aunts are terrible. They go for you with hat pins. But the worst is when the girl finds herself out where Howl lives and turns up at the door crying and miserable. Howl goes out through the back door and Calcifer and I have to deal with them all. I hate the unhappy ones, Calcifer said. They drip on me. I'd rather have them angry. Now let's get this straight, Sophie said, clenching her fists knobbily in the red satin. What does Howl do to these poor females? I was told he ate their hearts and took their souls away. Michael laughed uncomfortably. Then you must come from market chipping. Howl sent me down there to blacken his name when we first set up the castle. I said that sort of thing. It's what ants usually say. It's only true in a manner of speaking. From a certain point of view. A certain point of view? A certain point of view.
Howl's very fickle, said Calcifer. He's only interested until the girl falls in love with him. Then he can't be bothered with her.
But he can't rest until he's made her love him, Michael said eagerly. You can't get any sense out of him until he has. I always look forward to the time when the girl falls for him. Things get better then.
Well, until they track him down, said Calcifer. You'd think he'd have the sense to give them a false name, Sophie said scornfully.
The scorn was to hide the fact that she was feeling somewhat foolish. Oh, he always does, Michael said. He loves giving false names and posing as things. He does it even when he's not courting girls. Haven't you noticed that he's Sorcerer Jenkin in Porthaven and Wizard Pendragon in Kingsbury, as well as horrible Howl in the castle? Sophie had not noticed, which made her feel even more foolish still. And feeling foolish made her angry.
Well, I think it's wicked going around and making poor girls unhappy. It's heartless and it's pointless. He's made that way, Calcifer said.
Michael pulled a three-legged stool up to the fire and sat on it, while Sophie sewed, telling her of Howl's conquests and some of the trouble that had happened afterwards. Sophie muttered at the fine suit. She still felt very, very foolish.
So, you ate hearts, didn't you, Suit? Why do aunts put the things so oddly when they talk about their nieces? Probably fancied you themselves, my good Suit. How would you feel with a raging aunt after you, eh?
As Michael told her the story of the particular aunt he had in mind, it occurred to Sophie that it was probably just as well that the rumors of Howl had come to market chipping in those words. She could imagine a strong-minded girl like Letty otherwise being very interested in Howl and ending up very unhappy. Michael had just suggested lunch, and Calcifer, as usual, had groaned when Howl flung the door open and came in more discontented than ever.
Something to eat? Said Sophie.
No, hot water in the bathroom, Calcifer. He stood moodily in the bathroom door a moment. Sophie, have you tidied up this shelf of spells in here by any chance? Sophie felt more foolish than ever. Nothing would have possessed her to admit that she'd gone through all of those packets and jars looking for pieces of a girl.
I haven't touched a thing,
she replied virtuously as she went on to get the frying pan. Well, I hope you didn't, Michael said uneasily as the bathroom door slammed. Rinsings and gushings came from the bathroom while Sophie fried lunch.
He's using a lot of hot water, Calcifer said from under the pan. I think he's tinting his hair. I hope you left the hair spells alone. For a plain man with mud-colored hair, he's terribly vain about his looks.
Oh, shut up, snapped Sophie. I put everything back just where I found it. She was so cross that she emptied the pan of eggs and bacon over Calcifer. Calcifer, of course, ate them with enormous enthusiasm and much flaring and gobbling. Sophie fried more over the spitting flames. She and Michael ate them. They were clearing away, and Calcifer was running his blue tongue round his purple lips when the bathroom door crashed open and Howl shot out, wailing in despair. Look at this, he shouted. Look at this! What has that one-woman force of chaos done to these spells? Sophie and Michael whirled round and looked at Howl. His hair was wet, but, apart from that, neither of them could see that it looked any different.
If you mean me, Sophie said,
and began. I do mean you! Look! Howl shrieked. He sat down with a thump on the three-legged stool and jabbed at his wet head with his finger. Look, survey, inspect, my hair is ruined. I look like a pan of bacon and eggs. Michael and Sophie bent nervously over Howl's head. It seemed the usual flaxen color to the roots. The only difference might have been a slight, very slight, trace of red. Sophie found that agreeable. It reminded her a little of the color of her own hair, or that her own hair should have been. "I think it's very nice," she said. "Nice," screamed Howl. "You would. How you did it on purpose. You couldn't rest until you made me miserable, too. Look at it, it's ginger. I shall have to make it hide until it's grown out." He spread his arms out passionately. "Despair, anguish, horror." The room turned dim. Huge, cloudy, human-looking shapes bellied up in all four corners and advanced on Sophie and Michael, howling as they came. The howls became as moaning horror, and went up to despairing brays, and then up again to screams of pain and terror. Sophie pressed her hands to her ears, but the screams passed through her hands, louder and louder still, more horrible every second. Calcifer shrank hurriedly down in the grate and flickered his way under his lowest log. Michael grabbed Sophie by her elbow and dragged her to the door. He spun the knob to blew down, kicked the door open, and got them both out into the street in Port Haven as fast as he could. The noise was almost as horrible out there. Doors were opening all down the road, and people were running out with their hands over their ears. "Ought we to leave him alone in that state?" Sophie quavered. "Yes," said Michael. "If he thinks it's your fault, then definitely." They hurried through the town, pursued by throbbing screams. Quite a crowd came with them. In spite of the fact that the fog had now become a seeping sea drizzle, everyone made for the harbor or the sands where the noise seemed easier to bear. The gray vastness of the sea soaked it up a little. Everyone stood in damp puddles, looking out at the misty white horizon and the dripping ropes on the moored ships, while the noise became a gigantic, heartbroken sobbing. Sophie reflected that she was seeing the sea close for the first time in her life. It was a pity that she was not enjoying it more. The sobs died away to vast, miserable sighs, and then, finally, to silence. Almost bedtime, baby girl. She's busy being cute at me off screen. "Is something wrong with the poor sorcerer, Mrs. Witch?" "He's a little unhappy today," Michael said. "Come on, I think we can risk going back now." As they went along the stone quayside, several sailors called out anxiously from the moored ships, wanting to know if the noise meant storms or bad luck. "Not at all," Sophie called back. "It's all over now." But it was not. They came back to the wizard's house, which was an ordinary crooked little building from the outside that Sophie would not have recognized if Michael had not been in there with her, or had not been with her. Michael opened the shabby little door rather cautiously.
Pet the dog. Pet the dog, the most important."
Inside, Howl was still sitting on his stool. He sat in an attitude of utter despair, and he was covered all over in thick green slime. "Are you having a difficult time?" "Oh, you're stuck under the chair, Goober. Here, I'll let you lay like that. That better? Okay, good. You can make your happy arms now. I don't want belly rubs anymore." There were horrendous, dramatic, violent quantities of green slime. Oodles of it. It covered Howl completely. It draped his head and shoulders in sticky dollops, heaping on his knees and hands, trickling in glops down his legs, and dripping off the stool in sticky strands. It was oozing ponds and crawling pools over most of the floor. Long fingers of it had crept into the hearth, and it smelled vile. "Save me!" Calcifer cried in a hoarse whisper. He was down to 2 desperately flickering small flames. "This stuff is going to put me out!" Sophie held up her skirt and marched as near to Howl as she could get, which was not very near.
"Stop it," she said. "Stop it at once. You are behaving just like a baby."
Howl did not move nor answer. His face stared from behind the slime, white and tragic and wide-eyed. "What shall we do? Is he dead?" Michael asked, jittering beside the door. Michael was a nice boy, Sophie thought, but a bit helpless in a crisis.
"No, of course he isn't," she said. "And if it wasn't for Calcifer, he could behave like a jellied eel all day for all I care. Open the bathroom door."
While Michael was working his way between the pools of slime to the bathroom, Sophie threw her apron into the hearth to stop more of the stuff getting near Calcifer and snatched up the shovel. She scooped up loads of ash and dumped them into the biggest pools of slime, and it hissed violently. The room filled with steam and smelled worse than ever. Sophie furled up her sleeves, bent her back to get a good purchase on the wizard's slimy knees, and pushed Howl, stool and all, towards the bathroom. Her feet slipped and skidded in the slime, but, of course, the ooziness helped the stool move too. Michael came and pulled at Howl's slime-draped sleeves. Together they trundled him into the bathroom. There, since Howl still refused to move, they shunted him into the shower stall. "Hot water, Calcifer," Sophie panted grimly. "Very hot." It took an hour to wash the slime off of Howl. It took Michael another hour to persuade Howl to persuade Howl to get off the stool and into dry clothes. Luckily, the gray and scarlet suit Sophie had just mended had been draped over the back of the chair, out of the way of the slime. The blue and silver suit was ruined. Sophie told Michael to put it in the bath to soak. Meanwhile, mumbling and grumbling, she fetched more hot water. She turned the doorknob to green down and swept all of the slime out onto the moors. So impatient, my little girl. Okay, 10 more minutes, and then it's bedtime. You know how this works. I love you, baby. She is my emotional support dog, but she is also my responsibility dog. She makes sure that I get to bed. I love you. You gotta wait, though. I'm almost done. She turned the doorknob green down and swept all of the slime out onto the moors. The castle left a trail like a snail in the heather, but it was an easy way to get rid of the slime. There were some advantages to living in a moving castle, Sophie thought as she washed the floor. She wondered if Howl's noises had been coming from the castle too, in which case she pitied the folk of Market Chipping. By this time Sophie was tired and cross. She knew the green slime was Howl's revenge on her, and she was not at all prepared for to be sympathetic when Michael finally led Howl forth from the bathroom, clothed in gray and scarlet, and sat him tenderly in the chair by the hearth.
"That was plain stupid," Calcifer sputtered. "Were you trying to get rid of the best part of your magic or something?"
Howl took no notice. He just sat, looking tragic and shivering.
"I can't even get him to speak," Michael whispered miserably.
"It's just a tantrum," Sophie said. Martha and Letty were good at having tantrums too. She knew how to deal with those. On the other hand, it is quite a risk to spank a wizard for getting hysterical about his hair. Anyway, Sophie's experience told her that tantrums are so seldom about the thing they appear to be about. She made Calcifer move over so that she could balance a pan of milk on the logs. When it was warm, she thrust a mugful into Howl's hands. "Drink it," she said. "Now, what was all this fuss about? Is it this young lady you keep going to see? Howl sipped the milk dolefully. "Yes," he said. "I left her alone to see if that would make her remember me fondly, and it hasn't. She wasn't sure even when I last saw her. Now she tells me that there's another fellow." He sounded so miserable that Sophie felt quite sorry for him. Now his hair was dry, she noticed guiltily. It really was almost pink. "She's the most beautiful girl there ever was in these parts," Howl went on mournfully. "I love her so dearly, but she scorns my deep devotion and gets sorry for another fellow. How can she have another fellow after all of this attention I've given her? They usually get rid of the other fellows as soon as I come along." Sophie's sympathy shrank quite sharply. It occurred to her that if Howl could cover himself with green slime so easily, then he could just as easily turn his hair the proper color. "Well, then why don't you feed the girl a love potion and get it over with?" she said. "Oh, no," said Howl. "That's not playing the game. That would spoil the fun." Sophie's sympathy shrank again. A game, was it?
Don't you ever give a thought for the poor girl? She snapped.
Howl finished the milk and gazed into the mug with a sentimental smile. I think of her all the time. Lovely, lovely Letty Hatter. Sophie's sympathy went for good with a sharp bang. A good deal of anxiety took its place instead. Oh, Martha, she thought, you have been busy, so it wasn't anyone in Cesare's you were talking about. So, that is your 2 chapters for the evening. And it sounds very much like I will be finishing this book before we do any more Neverwhere, or indeed, I'm going to have to very quickly read. I can grab it real quick. I lent my parents Howl's Moving Castle, and I think Dad misplaced the book. So they got me a 3-book set. So I have the sequel. So yeah, I need to bump that up my reading list. I dropped stuff. Anyway, you all have much more important things to do than listen to me prattle on. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And remember that if people can hate without knowing anything about you, then I can love you. And, well, anybody who followed me from Imgur, I am very, very grateful for the support, because it was extremely heartwarming to hear both the people who appreciated my meanderings or the story, or found a little bit of themselves in my own story. So, thank you. It means quite a lot to me. And in the meantime, oh best beloved, get some rest and sleep well.